Hey, hey, Lazarus Symposium. Delighted today to be bringing Dan Winter forth again, conjuring the man himself to discuss the many exciting developments in the realm of consciousness in physics and quantifying consciousness, the aura and other spiritual energy sources, which lead to remarkable insights. How are we utilizing and building upon these developments, and what can we expect in the study of consciousness in physics? So that's the sort of rather abstruse remit of this conversation. But I have to say that broadcasting as I am here from Malibu, having just done a keynote at the Consciousness Life Expo thingy that just happened, I have another guest, a secret guest, none other than Rick Levine, the greatest astrologer on the surface, on the plane of existence.
On this plane only. Hey, Dan, good to see you again.
Hi, Rick. You're looking good. I love your shirt.
Thank you.
I'm very happy, thrilled to have Rick here as a house guest. Of course, I'm a house guest myself of the Queen of Hollywood, Sue Wong. So we're both enjoying her Malibu house here. Dan, let's kick off. First question, and if you feel that Rick can augment something you're saying, you could direct me to swing the computer screen around. Otherwise, I'll do it according to my thought forms. But please explain how, in simple terms, how we use physics to understand consciousness.
Well, and by the way, I think Rick's field, effect of astrology and gravity, has everything to do with consciousness. It's very related. In fact, that's what we need to talk about. So glad you're here. But yes, the specific question. So first, physics is the only actually clear and precise language on the planet. The ancients had many terms for consciousness, even like words great spirit or Sushra Parumna, many ancient yogic terms. And these terms are useful, but without the precision of physics, they're not really shareable. So we clearly need electrical engineers. And me being an electrical engineer, everything looks like a nail if you're a hammer. So, but no, the nature of consciousness should not be regarded as a mystery. It is not. When the children see without their eyes, they all say the same thing. I saw a vortex, obviously a plasma vortex, inside my head, blindfolded, and then an eyeball opened up and I could see. And by the way, then they begin seeing ancestors as well. And that plasma vortex is a clue to the very nature of consciousness. And one of the most famous physicists on the planet, we well know, Bill Tiller, famously measured many times that focused human attention causes charge to compress. It's electrically centripetal. So we can say with great precision that consciousness is, in fact, a plasma vortex. And the centripetal center of that vortex is what you can take with you like a tornado when you see without your eyes, and when you leave your body, and when you die. So when you know what consciousness is, which is a small plasma tornado that can get bigger when you go from inhabiting the array inside your brain, which is called synapses, to a larger array outside your head, which is called longitudinal interferometry, the ancestral memory collective unconscious. So from the little array to the bigger array, in both cases, consciousness is that plasma vortex. And we'll talk later, maybe that predicts exactly what allows lucid dreaming, what allows remote viewing, and what allows you to take memory through death. It's the density of that plasma vortex induced by compression. So in brainwave science, when we measure golden ratio harmonics in brainwaves, it means you got a handle on the throat of that tornado and you squeezed it. And when it begins to compress, for example, the kids who learn to go to trance, they make alpha and gamma cascade, which is literally their will intent pushing on that plasma vortex to bring it to a point. And when it comes to a point, tuned by Planck, there's a sorting at the point called an eyeball. And that is the physics of consciousness. And physicists must know that, or they don't know what a soul is, and they can't make decisions about life force. So that's going to lead us to the other questions about the centripetal, the fact that physicists don't know why anything is centripetal. So not only they cannot know why an object falls to the ground, but they cannot know what consciousness is.
Right, right. Well, I mean, Rick, how certifiably insane is Dan on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, I'd say a good 11 or 12, maybe 13 because it's a prime number. But the truth of the matter is that what Dan's talking about is so important, and it's so critical to understand that most physicists don't have a clue as to what physics is really about, because modern physicists, and I'm eliminating some, let's say, next generation or kind of new paradigm, I don't know what the right word would be, but most physicists still suffer from that old superstition of the belief of materialism, and therefore they think that consciousness is something separate from physics. Physics is
That's
about
the problem.
the 90
Exactly.
degree angle, the real world, the material world, and so everything else either doesn't exist or it has nothing to do with physics, or worse, that it's a product of the 90 degree world. In other words, that consciousness somehow manifested from the complexity of our nervous system, when the fact is it's exactly the opposite.
And you know, Rick, I love it that, you know, I'm a double Scorpio and I got a bunch of T-squares. And you know, the T-squares are called four-wave mixing phase conjugation, literally, you know, midheaven, double Scorpio, the whole thing.
Exactly.
And so
Maximum interference pattern.
and that possibility of that compression is why, for example, at sunrise and sunset, you can do Agnihotra and remote viewing and die better, because
Right.
you get that compression node in which to propagate. So the physics of astrology is instructive, actually. It's beautiful.
Unfortunately, most astrologers, like most physicists, don't understand what they're doing.
Dan, let's see if we can correspond your genius with Rick's. What's God's favorite number?
Well, seeing that golden ratio is the primary
1.6,
geometry of
1.80339,
the primary geometry of all orbital mechanics, as well as every living protein, is based on golden ratio. So that might be a clue.
So what's the number?
1.618033989. That actually is the only solution to constructive wave interference, therefore the only solution to compression, and therefore the cause of gravity and consciousness.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
We're in full agreement.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you disagree on?
Probably, but that's just my nature.
Okay, so Dan, how are gravity and consciousness related?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we were just talking about astrology. So the core issue here, the question physicists are missing, they need to know what causes anything to be centripetal. Electronegativity, consciousness, and gravity. They're all electrically centripetal. And since physics doesn't know why anything is centripetal, they cannot know what gravity or consciousness is. And that gets us to the question of charge collapse, which is the next question. And I have a slideshow.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, let's crack on with the slideshow.
But the slideshow is addressed to the next three questions. So
Well,
just mention the next.
Well, I'm about to do that. What is perfected charge collapse was the next.
Good. And the next question?
And the one after that is, how does the compression point, i.e. the rainbow point of the vortex, help us call our ancestors?
Exactly. Yes. And the next question
is, what causes wave functions to collapse?
There it is. So if you know what charge collapse is, then you can know how you produce consciousness where charge does collapse. So wave collapse, charge collapse, implosion, you know, it's all about this centripetal force. And that is the slideshow, basically. It's just a few minutes, the best of the best, whatever. So can you see my?
Perfectly.
Okay, so it's entitled Planck fire. Now, Planck, the origin of the musical key signature of the universe, Planck length and time. And if you multiply that by phi, that's called Planck fire. Perfected fractal implosive charge collapse, cause of gravity and consciousness. And if you were to animate that in 3D, stellated dodeca ecosa, and then if you which is the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and every living protein. So you take that Planck, the musical key signature of the universe, the same for 1 billion light years in all directions, and you multiply by a golden ratio, get hydrogen radii, the most important molecule in the body, ADP, the exact only 2 precise frequencies of color which make photosynthesis. You get the definition of all sacred dimension, the British foot, etc. Get Schumann brainwave harmonics for bliss. You get the Mayer wave. You get Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year. You get the geometry of all implosion, negentropy, and self-organization. This is the equation. We're not going to do the detailed math. And this is all at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. So this is what it looks like from the side. For example, predicting the frequencies we use for implosion, infrasound, and therify, and the imploder. And that cascade of frequencies, and this is Charlie Zeiss here, allows this 76-degree angle to do plasma projection implosion. It's the base angle of the Russian and the peak angle of the Egyptian pyramids. And this is actually the angle that makes a vortex, like Schauberger's, implode and make gravity and voltage from gravity. So this is the side view, and Sacha knows this picture very well. He was with us when we first did this in France. And so the side view is the transverse coming in on the left, transverse EMF, and it goes down the caduceus and out the squirt gun at the Planck threshold and becomes longitudinal, which is the physics of gravity and all action at a distance, and how DNA radio works. So this is an introduction to the only possible perfected charge collapse. The thing that's nice is that every physicist pretty much agrees that charge collapse is the cause of gravity in the solution of the unified field. And now every scientist studying consciousness agrees, Wigner, von Neumann, Penrose, Hameroff, they all agree charge collapse is the cause of consciousness. But what none of them have a clue is the cause of charge collapse. Oops. This is called the emperor with no clothes, the elephant with no clothes in the room.
Which incidentally was the name of one of Penrose's books that showed that he gets a lot of stuff, but he doesn't get it.
Yeah, and you know, Nassim used Penrose tiling to describe the charge collapse at the protein radii, so they were close. They were close, and Nassim actually got the golden ratio in the universe structure. But to actually understand why the golden ratio produces implosion charge collapse. So this is our whole work on electrogravity, and we're going to do this in another session with Sacha that's coming up soon, I think, is in the electrogravitics of this. That's the website. But so here's Wigner and von Neumann agreeing charge collapse is mechanism of consciousness. And here's Penrose and Hameroff agreeing charge collapse either causes or is caused by consciousness. And asking which is it caused by or is it the cause of is asking, like, is a vortex the cause of a tornado or is a tornado the cause of? So there's many articles on charge collapse, the mechanism of consciousness. So this is an agreed phenomena. If you knew the cause of charge collapse, you could know the cause of consciousness. So this is what it looks like. It's vortex recursively, non-destructively self-re-entering. And that non-destructive self-re-entry describes the implosion of plasma, which causes consciousness because, and Sacha, this is that second question. So how is consciousness awareness, how is perception generated at the place of the cross point where the vortex turns inside out? For example, when the kids who see without their eyes, it's at that vortex point, they're seeing through a tunnel. What happens at the vortex turning inside out point is there is impedance matching by compression with the longitudinal array. And that is the eyeball. That's the tunnel. In conventional physics, that's called entanglement creates action at a distance, but entanglement perfected is what phase conjugation is. And they call it an Einstein-Rosen bridge, but it's actually a wormhole into the longitudinal array. That's why, for example, when the kids start seeing without their eyes, by making that vortex work, they also see their ancestors. This is the old slide where, you know, Tiller measured focused attention causes compression. So physics is clear. Consciousness causes compression, but do not have a clue to why. So here is we have many examples of the brainwave study of this. So when Jean-Charles Moyen did teleportation, by location with many witnesses multiple times, we measured the brainwaves, and it is a golden ratio, an octave cascade you see here. And he literally turned inside out, exactly like the other slide. And this is now the same picture of the same brainwaves, golden ratio cascade in blue, octave cascade in pink, the same picture is specifically what enables kids to see without their eyes. The reason they see their ancestors is the same reason that vortex plasma opens like a tunnel inside their head. That is the nature of consciousness. So this is me. I can't make, I don't make it to gamma, but I can do 5 harmonics in golden ratio and have wonderful bliss experience. Here is measurement of telepathy. This is the octave cascade, not the golden cascade. So this is, but remember, in the remote viewing in Portal, we have octave and golden ratio cascade. So this is what that looks like at flameinmind.com. So basically, we're generating, in this case, 5 harmonics in golden ratio with a big peak in the theta. With the big peak in the theta here, it's even more visible here, means access to the collective unconscious. This is me. Look at the yellow peak. It's off the charts, about 4 hertz. That's access to the deep unconscious. So I can do clairaudience, some ancestor memory, great. But getting up in the high gamma, no. I know where I need to go. So this is the old story about non-destructive charge collapse, Earth grid dodeca, galaxy dodeca, that's embeddability. And the same physics of implosive compression is the origin of the heartbeat electrically, and therefore the physics of compassion, literally the ability to turn inside out non-destructively. Again, I'm just going to do these slides very quickly, and then we'll. So the reason this
take your time, Dan. Seriously.
All right. Well, I don't want to go too fast, but so this is the reason this vortex, in this case, Schauberger, is piezoelectrically doped with a rock powder. And the angle of that vortex around 76 degrees means there's a voltage difference from the narrow to the widest part. And that means the charge is implosively collapsing, tuned to Planck. That's why this made gravity, and it made voltage from gravity. Now, the Vimana Nazi Bell Hanabu is the same physics except with mercury. So knowing how a vortex makes gravity is identical with knowing how a vortex makes consciousness, actually, because there's a way out for charge at center tuned to Planck. And this is those same harmonics, Planck times golden ratio, in the infrasound of the Schumann resonance, the brainwave harmonics of bliss, all the same equation, and the breath harmonics of bliss, and the sacrocranial harmonics of bliss. They're all the identical equation. This is implosion, and this is called the perfect flame. And so here you see in green the sacrocranial harmonics physics of Kundalini. This red one here, 0.0959, is actually 0.1 hertz. That's the Mayer wave. And notice that in red, you have my equation. So the sacrocranial infrasound is identical. And remember, the sacrocranial pump is pumping, you have access to bliss and implosion. And the key point is you can make a soul. Remember, in the ET politics of the day, if you can make a soul, your DNA gets valuable. Otherwise,
very good. Very good.
And this is the infrasound. This is that same slide. So we won't go, and this is—
Dan, before you go forward, just quickly jump back to 28, slide 28, please.
Sure.
Yeah, you said the perfect flame is a fire that does not consume. Can you just elaborate on that ever so slightly?
Yeah, well, it's a cold fire. You know, cold atmospheric plasma is one of the hottest subjects in all of medicine today. Hint, Therify.net. So how could a flame be cold? That sounds like cold fusion, doesn't it? It's called non-destructive compression. You know, the moment when Schauberger's vortex spontaneously began to get colder, hint, negentropy, was the moment it started making voltage from gravity. Oh, and the plasma tubes of Therify.net spontaneously start getting colder. That means, remember, heat is just a name for disorder. So increased order is named negentropy. That's why it gets colder. And that's the famous ancient myth of the flame that does not consume. It's literally a blue fire.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so we were going. There's actually only about 6 more slides we were going to do. Here's the publications related to the physics of hydrogen. You can see all this at the website, but we've published all this pretty meaningfully. And then this, if you take that same plasma symmetry in the letters that became the movie Stargate, you learn how stargates work, which is the same implosion to couple with the longitudinal interferometry, which is why the heart of Orion is so much fought over. Lately, the bad guys got kicked out.
What do ghosts do after death?
Well, here, I'm going to stop the share here. Let's do. So the idea is that if there's a strong emotion, it will leave a plasma shadow in the room. And if the inertia toward being centripetal is insufficient at the moment of death, then the plasma cannot propagate into that array and is stuck.
So the reason why Henry VIII is famed for trolling up and down the corridors of his erstwhile palace, even hundreds of years after death, is because of what?
Well, you cannot successfully pass through death into the longitudinal array unless your emotions have been compressed into something which is shareable, literally pure intent. So obviously, if you haven't been able to distribute that emotion into something that serves the whole gene pool, you can't implode, compress, and propagate, which is why ghosts will use things like someone with bliss or therify to deliver a ghost, because they gain centripetal force, and that's how they propagate out of that array. Otherwise, essentially, ghosts are stuck where charge cannot implode. And the same physics, plasma physics, of why you can see orbs where you cut trees down, but you'll never see one in a metal box. And you will never see a ghost in a metal box because plasma can't live there. But when the ghost gets up enough centripetal force, then it can propagate in the array. It's called going to the next dimension, but it actually means that centripetal force is gained. And that implosion is related to bliss, but it's related to the real physics of what we call sacred space.
So are you saying that just to stick with this for a moment, that the ghost is sentient, or the ghost is a psycho-emotional flux that's still magnetically harnessed in the temporal plane in some magical way?
Let's look at the physics of lucid dreaming. Most people can't lucid dream because their aura can't get centripetal enough to propagate coherently in the longitudinal, sometimes called the rainbow light body, Kesjan body. But when they become able to focus and get centripetal, have access to some bliss, for example, then they begin to lucid dream, meaning they will take memory through death and be a successful ghost. So the critical inertia to get centripetal, which means the aura can get dense enough to then propagate longitudinal coherence. The ba from the ka is the Egyptian term. And that's the difference between being a stuck ghost and being part of the collective unconscious.
So you've just proven why masturbating makes you go blind.
Conservation of sexual inertia can be the beginning of Kundalini, but stuck sexual inertia is equally bad.
Right. Any comments on masturbation?
Didn't make me go blind.
But there's actually a straw. There's a straw at the tailbone, which sucks. That's the physics of sacrocranial. And that haploid DNA can actually go up the tailbone, and the sperm is missing, and only the thick prostatic juice comes out the penis during intense Kundalini. So that haploid DNA going back up the spine, literally the reverse circuit, is because the sacrocranial is a pump. And so there is a function for sexual energy in delivering Kundalini. In my case, I was a virgin at some ridiculously late age and developed Kundalini. Now, that doesn't mean it can drive you nuts, but if you use it well, it can be implosive.
Right. Fascinating. Okay. Boom, boom. What developments, discoveries in physics and consciousness excite you the most today?
I feel that we done good in terms of translating this to technology. Our brainwave tech, flameandmind.com, fabulous. Our water implosion tech, theimploder.com, fabulous. Our plasma tech, therify.net, fabulous. It works. Rejuvenates in 25 countries. So what are we missing? Gravity making, electrogravitics. When we prove why objects fall to the ground, we are going to have electrogravitics. For example, phase conjugate magnetics, which I invented the term. You can make gravity. We know the difference between warp and impulse. So I think the actual development of true electrogravitics means not just the elimination of every form of transport on this planet as the Stone Ages, powered by dinosaurs farting. Come on, we're the laughingstock. But also the end of the 0 point energy. But even beyond that, if we study how you navigate when you lucid dream and when you die, you are a plasma donut. How do you steer? Study that. There's a sequence of vector directions called Hebrew and Sanskrit. And if you fill the optical cortex with one sacred letter, it's a vector director. So when we prove electrogravitics, we're also going to teach our kids how to navigate and be a soul and steer among the stars.
Very good. So what are we looking at here, Dan? What are we looking at here? Hang on.
So the video you see on the screen right now, it's from the 1950s. People speak about anti-gravity. It's not anti-gravity, it's electromagnetic levitation. And it's the type of technology that they had in the Second World War. And of course, way before in the 19th and 18th and 17th centuries. It's what we wrongly understand as Tartaria or Tartary. It's not that, it's beyond that, it's more than that. But for the sake of understanding, the reset of humanity and what happened to the previous civilization that built the Americas and Europe and what we call today Russia and Siberia. So yeah, this is kind of like everything is electromagnetism. Everything is like extracting the energy from the ether, which was forbidden. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it was forbidden specifically by law to be able to use free energy and to extract the energy from the ether.
That may be a Podklednov experiment, or it may be the Mercury vortex. It's one of the two, probably.
Okay. I also wanted you to look at this whilst we're at it, whilst I've got this here. There's some extraordinary footages here. I don't know if you've seen this before, Dan. Quickly have a glance.
Oh, I see shape-shifting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of advanced cultures have that skill, I think.
What are these phenomena that we're looking at?
Well, in the first case, I think I've seen quite some similar films of the Podklednov work. Podklednov famously, he was using certain insect skeletons. You know how they said that the postmen in Tibet could actually fly, and they actually evolved to the point where their bones were a phase conjugate dielectric. And
it was the geometry connected to the exoskeleton of insects and the bumblebee.
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going.
Yeah,
that's exactly where I'm going with this. Yes. So that's called a phase conjugate dielectric. Now, which is basically implosive capacitance. Now, if you take the right concavity of curvature of phase conjugate dielectrics, for example, rotating fullerenes, the reason that creates propulsion is because the capacitance implodes. So insect skeletons were a very useful insight into that physics of phase conjugate dielectrics, which also, by the way, explains the Kaba stone and the physics of alchemy, the projective powder. It's all about phase conjugate or implosive dielectrics. The barium-strontium titanate was also the propulsion of the warp drive, and it's a long story. So if you make capacitors implode, you have super efficient capacitance, and then the curvature of that capacitance becomes implosive capacitance. What happens is that then the charge is a vector direct imploded toward a phase conjugate center, spitting out a longitudinal directionally. That's why the insect skeletons made propulsion in Podklednov. You can see all the pictures, goldenmean.info/gravity politics. Now, there's many similar films of Podklednov's people doing that kind of thing. I suspect that's where that came from. It was Russia. But also, that could have been a Mercury vortex. Now, Mercury vortex, you have two concentric cylinders, and the mercury is doped with a highly conductive iron powder, making it red. So the magnetic flux is imploding along with the hydraulic, hydrostatic, the high inertia of the mercury. And the two implosive conjugations, both the hydraulic and the magnetic implosion, creates a very strong longitudinal vector. And that's how the Nazi Bell flew. So that could have been a small Mercury vortex as well. The key is, in both cases, whether it's implosive capacitance or implosive hydraulics or implosive magnetics, the key is, do you know why a vortex makes gravity? Then you understand perfectly it's not a mystery. And it's necessary to know that, otherwise we won't know how to steer when we die.
Very good. Questions for Dan?
No, but I think that it's important to understand, at least from my perspective, that the same thing happens at a macro scale in the solar system, which is why planetary mechanics works and why there is a transfer of information that appears to be some sort of non-local energy. And according to what Dan just said, and he mentioned with the golden mean, Venus, which is the most stunningly obvious example, because everywhere on the planet, people think that Venus is the planet of love, of beauty, of aesthetic perfection, of harmony, of the light of the heart. And Venus goes around the sun at about 224.7 Earth days a year. And the Earth goes around at about 365.24 days a year. And 365 divided by 224 is 1.62, which is the damn golden mean. Venus is the harmonic beat proportion of the golden mean to Earth. And I know Dan knows this. I'm just saying that for your listeners, here's a really simple example of how that golden mean harmonic works in real life and astrology, which to me are the same thing.
And that's why they say that Osiris is reincarnated. They're pulling Osiris's body back together there, which is basically Yankee, and that's why they call it the morning star or Lucifer. But for the astrologer, then seeing how that vector directs plasma ultimately through the heart of the sun, which is an eyeball. And that is a Stargate 2, probably Andromeda, which is a Stargate 2, the heart of Orion. So these are organs of perceptions that embed. And as your aura gets bigger, first you see, you feel your center of gravity at the heart of the Earth, then you feel your center of gravity go to the heart of the sun. And each one is a cool eyeball organ of perception linking you to a higher being body.
Dan, would you agree that it is as some cultures hypothesize, that it is the revolution of something around a center that creates the illusion of time?
Time is not illusion. Time.
Okay, that creates time.
Yeah. Well, time is only a name for relative spin rate, nothing else.
Very good. Yeah, very good.
That's all it is. But and when it embeds, you call that coincidence because it allows coupling.
Perfect.
Very good. Okay, I want to take you to another let me just quickly share. Can you see this, Dan?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is also an excerpt from my lecture that I just did a couple of days ago here in California, somewhere in Burma. This is the valley wherein lives one of the immortals. I'm inclined to take it desperately seriously because this was the lineage of masters that ended up doing this extraordinary plasma beam healing on me when I was poisoned in 2016. And this is the individual, the creature that comes out every couple of years. I think it comes out for 2 days every 2 or 3 years, and it stands in a mercurial fire. This is why I asked you about the flame that doesn't burn. Stands in a mercurial fire until it burns away. He's completely untouched, comes out, performs a kind of darshan to select people who are brought before him, and then sets his gaze before he departs again for a couple of years. Now, he's well known to be well over 1,120 years of age. So this particular individual, what is he doing right that doesn't apparently involve technology per se?
Well, he's clearly using the implosion of the geobiology well. And he would not ever do this in a metal city, no. So you've got very good implosive magnetics in that beautiful valley, clearly. So the magnetic line implosion is a big function there. Now, what the Tibetans call green lion, red lion is a shrinking process which potentizes the implosive compression. In their case, it's enabling taking more memory through death. Their body shrinks and the fingernails remain. But, that mercury fire is the same metaphor here, that they're enabling more implosive compression, which gives them more psychokinesis, which would make sense. And probably there is a vast array of ancestral memory, which is part of his lineage, which requires that particular connection on the land. for example, why when Tibetans, great saints, die, you have rainbows. We know the physics, they've added centripetal force to their environment. And when great Australians die, the storm that goes across the continent is their family line, literally magnetically implosion from their own genetics on that line. So that is how intergenerational memory is potentized.
Very good. Okay. North Pole. Is the North Pole today? If not, why not?
I think it's no one would argue that the planet has magnetically and gravitationally inverted many times. That's kind of old news. North Pole versus South Pole in pure magnetics is probably related to centripetal centrifugal, which explains why every living protein goes one way only and enantiomorphically, because only the polarity of lightning, which was centripetal, allowed primal soup to become DNA. The centrifugal pole blew it apart. So there's a serious difference between a North Pole and a South Pole in terms of centripetal and centrifugal, which is probably why the South Pole is more occupied in our case. But yeah, and whether it's wandering is an issue that the ancients told us. They put the pyramid array, they called it planet taming, to stabilize the Earth on its axis. Not only did this stabilize gravity and therefore atmosphere, you need to keep those magnetic lines in that dodeca, or this here planet's going to tip. This is called 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy. They call it planet taming. So what keeps the North Pole north? I think we need to know the origin of negentropy. Gaia's hypothesis was we are negentropic, but did they know why? They need to desperately.
Very good. How important do you think, and this is a baiting question, obviously, because I've got the man sat beside me, but how important do you believe astrology is in the 21st century?
Well, I think I would agree with Rick probably that much of astrology as it's practiced today is pure confusion, probably. But when you get to some pure principle, what does a T-square do? It phase conjugates. That's helpful. What does a pent do? It becomes implosively negentropic. So there are some, and the personality of these planets really has to do with their history. If you knew why a seed will not germinate if the moon's in a way, you can begin to understand astrology. The moon is opposite to conjugate, is hollow, metal, artificial. And if you get that in the way, that seed ain't going to grow. And it's a bad time to die because you can't go through the heart of the sun.
And what Dan is saying is based upon the work of a chemist student of Rudolf Steiner, a woman named Lily Kalisko, who came up with this idea of what she called capillary dynamolosis, in which she absolutely proved that the metal salts that were dissolved in water could not crystallize when the moon was between the planet that metal was associated with. In other words, when the moon was lined up with Venus,
Exactly.
copper, the metal associated with Venus, couldn't crystallize. When the moon lined up with the sun at a new moon, gold, which is related to the sun, cannot crystallize. And
I think
and this is has been repeated at Oxford a few years ago by someone who I know, and it's astounding work, but it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I think they called it sensitive crystallization processes in the blood. It was one of their, and that was the whole point is what allowed the crystal to become centripetal, which is the same physics of why a child focusing in a cloud puts a hole in that cloud, because the centripetal force of their attention enabled Christos, how to crystallize. So the vapor could share the space and become a droplet if. That is precipitation.
Very good. Very good. Last thing I'll be sharing with you. Let me just share screen again. Stand by.
Mercury. Yeah, it's explosive. Oh. Yeah, the Morgellon fiber. Yeah, that's relevant. Very relevant. Yep. Mhm. Mhm. Oh, what's happening here? Hmm. Oh, that's the black goo. Yeah. Oh, there's traces. Yeah, that's been infected.
Someday nobody knows, nobody knows. Someday nobody knows, nobody knows. Someday nobody knows, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Someday nobody knows, nobody knows.
That's not atmospheric. That's a gravity anomaly there.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to ask about there.
Yeah.
These are
Mhm.
also part of my keynote presentation. Black goo. What are we looking at with black goo?
Well, for example, the Kaaba stone was infected. The Draco had used it for a very destructive AI. It was originally programmed. I don't know if you know Harold Kautzvilla. I worked with him
Very
for
well.
years.
He's been on Lazarus.
That's right. That's right. Well, Harold did very well. Also, my friend Russell Wright wrote the book Body Bugs, the definitive on Morgellons. So these threads are phase conjugators as
Well, they're self-replicating nanodiodes.
well, yeah, that could be it. These threads are phase conjugators at atomic level, and they can be used for interstellar communication for good or evil. In this case, evil, actually. By the way, the high Royal Draco Siacar would never allow themselves to be infected, but most of the Draco colonies were widely infected with the black goo. Actually, there is some evidence that humans have actually been able to kick it out, but it's not easy. But basically, the physics is that if you have a conjugate fiber array, which can be a carbon nanotube, you can do this with silicon too, but if they have to be conjugators because it enables a coupling to the longitudinal array at the center of the tube, and that's how the interstellar communication happens actually. And these can be programmed for good or evil. In this case, the black cubes propagating in the science fiction was actually a true story. These black cubes could destroy ecosystems around the galaxy, and it was a scourge of the galaxy, really.
Just a side question. Why is it that those very strange Orthodox Jewish characters wear the black cube on their forehead? Any ideas?
Yeah, it's a sad confusion, actually. The original Kaaba stone was a glass meteorite embedded with gold nanobubbles, which was a dramatic phase conjugator. The Mad Caliph went mad because alchemists always eat there. But unfortunately, it was massively infected with the black goo. So unfortunately, I think the directional spin of the Muslims around that Kaaba cube are a serious propagator.
So should they be reversing the circumambulations, literally?
No, that black goo is highly infective, actually. And one indicator is this will create cultures which prevent rain and cause deserts. And this will create cultures which are destructive of women.
Wow.
This is an indicator directly of the black goo agenda, sadly.
That's fascinating. Okay, so moving on to that image of the vehicle hitting some phantasmalogical phenomenon and crumpling. Speak about the hyperdimensional physics there.
Well, it's another form of capacitive implosion. So I'm sure there's a very strong geobiological anomaly underground there. And that plasma vortex I didn't get the sense that that plasma vortex was so much inhabited as being an out of control geobiological vortex that you'd have to investigate the substructure to find the origin. But strong magnetic anomaly to the point of conjugation it's clear that I don't see that as being so much evil as being geobiology that's wounded. That probably, here's my guess, is there was a strong magnetic line which was serving a very global function, which got very tangled due to human interference. And so now there's a geobiological wormhole that's not happy.
So in a sense, bad dreaming, an ultimate expression of bad dreaming, probably with the utility of evil technologies, emphasis, the superhadron collider. So that could be, in a sense, the interference element in something like that.
Magnetic lines want to be mindful. If magnetic lines get tangled due to destructive, people cutting magnetic lines to build highways, that was a highway. Those magnetic lines will cause trouble, definitely. I mean, they're literally the definition of anger.
Fascinating.
Urge to touch, frustrate.
My friend in Romania, the senator, Senator Diana, just came out last week. I see it went viral, stating vociferously that the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey were triggered by HAARP. Would you agree with that? And if so, could you just elaborate a little on what is the science that we're seeing play out there?
Clearly, the low frequency interferometry modulating the RF at gigawatt capacities was extremely destructive to the Earth's aura. That's true about HAARP, although HAARP is closed and there are many other related towers out there. However, to say that, an evil mind specifically focused on that to destroy, I think that's oversimplistic. I do think earthquakes are caused by massive social anger, absolutely. And Tesla did not know why he caused earthquakes, but in fact, he was doing longitudinal interferometry without knowing the relationship to gravity. So I don't see some evil being saying, I'm going to make an earthquake over there. I think they're too stupid for that, honestly. But collective emotion not creating a shareable wave in the Earth grid causing earthquakes, yes. And dramatically, if there had been collective bliss process like the Sufis did for centuries, I'm sure there would not have been an earthquake.
Very good. Interesting. So do you have any questions for the master astrologer to my right? Anything you want to know about the future, Dan? Now's your moment.
I love the idea of a solar being and that all religions were basically sun god religions. What do you say is the definition of a sun god?
Well, I would want to even ask a better question, and that's what's the definition of future?
That's good. Once we understand time is a name for spin rate only, and that time reversal is only a name for negentropy, there's no other way to go backwards. So the future is simply an expression of where what's called as timelines, which are spin lines, can achieve distribution in such a way they don't destroy themselves. In other words, the only possible future for a wave is non-destructive compression, which means we don't have a future unless we learn to implode.
Well, I would agree with that. And we were actually talking, Sacha and I were talking about how the future is basically always a determined factor based upon the timeline, based upon where you are in the moment and the trajectory and the history and the momentum and so on. I actually think that the sun as the center of all of this is, like many people believe, not what everyone thinks. And I think that the entire solar system is an electromagnetic hum kind of its own sort of anti-gravity, or let's say gravity producing mechanism. And I would also say that the actual planets themselves are just as illusory as a subatomic particle, because what we're seeing is the artifact of the hum, meaning that the particle wave duality that exists at the microcosm also exists in the macrocosm. And we see Saturn as an artifact of a 3 cycle per century hum. And in fact, I call them BFPs. They're particles, but they're BFPs. They're big fucking particles. But it's still, they're part of a particle wave duality, and coming from a Newtonian error, astrologers have focused on the particles rather than the waveforms. And I also believe, and actually some of this is a credit to my discovering your work, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, is the importance of the aspects or the geometry created between those nodes or planets that are not divisible into 12. That the big mistake of astrology is the same mistake of Catholicism, and that is the emphasis of the 3-dimensional world, which is, you know, the 2 times 3 times 4. And the first step out of that is looking at the patternings of the 5-pointed star, the origin, as you know, of the golden mean, and the quintiles and septiles, division by 7, etc. And that holds as much meaning in astrology as anything else, but 9 out of 10 astrologers have never heard of that and don't even know that stuff exists.
Yeah,
So
and the
that's my little
divisible by 7 is tetracubic, 7 spins of the tetra, obviously. But the divisible by 5 is the implosion, and that is the point. And interestingly, that is then the solution to the particle wave duality, because the difference between particle and wave, obviously, is that it's all made of charge. When the charge is compressed, it's called a particle. And when the charge is uncompressed, it's called plasma. And every particle and every...
Yeah, I agree with that, Dan. And in fact, I would actually take that a step further and say what we know is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You know, the more you know about mass, the less you know about movement, or, you know,
position, yeah.
But I would say that exact same thing has to do with that compression or the popping of the quantum wave function, and that is that the particle is related to fate as the wave is related to free will. The more you know about one, the less you can know about the other, because the two are actually opposite sides of the exact same phenomenon.
And when the quiff pops, it only does through by conjugation to Planck, and the pop is propagation in the longitudinal.
Exactly, and that is consciousness.
Exactly. And
fate.
incidentally,
we're stuck by our own thoughts.
And that's precisely why the heart of the sun is an eyeball. It's cool. It is literally cooling.
Beautiful. So just on the side, most mainstream physics maintain that there is no aura in particle physics. What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, that's just exactly what we were discussing. The fact that the particle is only a name for the compression point, and the compression point is enabled by the array around it, which is the plasma. So only if the plasma is fractal does it compress to be called a particle. For example, after I proved Golden ratio times Planck is precisely hydrogen radii, then we knew why hydrogen exists, because the plasma around it can compress. That is the answer specifically to the question between the particle and the wave. It is the compression point.
Very good. So given that we're having this conversation today, and we're able to have this conversation today, are you feeling good about things in the world? I mean, where we're headed? Are we headed on a highway to hell, or are we headed toward a negentropic reseeding of the angelic and all that wonderful stuff?
I did 6 recordings with Elena Denon about the galaxy arrival of the Federation and Enki's return, which is all sort of good news. The Nebu is kicked out. But if we look around today, oh, shit. You know, they say, well, the big ET bad guys have been kicked out, but we still got to clean up our messes. What does that mean? You know, I've interpreted to mean if we work harder at teaching, then we can become a shareable wave. That was, let's literally become teachers. At a deeper level, we have formed luciddreamteam.com, and we believe planetary scale lucid dreaming groups, they can not only steer tornadoes, which is very common, by the way, they can steer planetary forces. And this is actually, this is the physics of peacemaking, peaceuniversity.net, where the only definition of peacemaking is the centripetal negentropy. They proved it. After the war at Vukovar, the underground water disappeared. You repair the magnetic lines to look like a rose, and you not only bring the water back, but that defines all peacemaking. Callahan proved in advance you could know which tribe was headhunters and which was friendly by whether their magnetic lines connect.
Beautiful.
Peacemaking.
So Rick, what is the Celestial Orchestra telling you to tell us about where we're at as a species, as a plane of existence?
That's a tough question, and I think that I would say that when people use astrology to get rid of personal responsibility, the planets made me do it. Oh, I'm a Scorpio, therefore I'm going to blah 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 blah. That is actually a single thing that everyone can participate in. I end every broadcast that I do with the following phrase: think cosmically, act locally. Because it does no good at all to go out into the edges of the cosmos, whether it's the macro or the microcosmic. It does no good at all to discover the mysteries of the universe unless you don't apply it in your everyday life. And that is really where, the big changes will occur by the changes of the individuals within it. One of the wise things that Carl Jung wrote, the last book he wrote before he died, a book called The Undiscovered Self, he said politicians will just run around the world getting crazier and crazier, and the ultimate solution of wars will never be through treaties or by politicians. The ultimate peace will come when there's peace in the minds and hearts of every individual.
Beautiful.
And so that's where we need to go.
Beautiful.
Take responsibility.
Beautiful. Last word to you, Dan.
A dreaming. I like what Rick is saying. It makes me think, well, we figured out that you could achieve healing at a distance with plasmatherapy.net better if you did it on a magnetic line cross and at sunrise and sunset. It's called phase conjugation. But if you studied Rick and learned about when you have a T-square cross, then you get even more compression and more embedding. And so that enables the connectivity. That is a good study. I think this has been a fun conversation. I
Very
thank
good.
you both.
Well, he says, turning to his audience, don't say I don't deliver. Two of the greatest minds on earth and hearts on earth. So Dan Winter, Rick Levine, thank you, friends.
It has been fun.
Thanks,
Really.
Sacha. Nice to see you again, Dan.
Blessings, Rick. It's been
All right,
great. Thank
Dan,
you.
we'll see you again soon. Much love. Bye now.
More fun. More fun. Bye-bye.